Welcome to another episode of Kitchen Sink Dharma. Now, one of the criticisms of modern Buddhism, particularly in the West, is it really overemphasizes personal development and it skates over the ethical teachings. And there's this idea that we're taught, as long as you're practicing mindfulness, maybe sitting in your office chair during your lunch break or taking a few minutes to focus on your breathing, then that's all you have to do. And never mind what's going on out there in the rest of the world. And that's not really the version of mindfulness that I've come across from insight meditation teachers, but I agree it's definitely out there. And there's some situations in which the ethics tend to get stripped out completely. And someone called Ron Purser coined the phrase mindfulness to describe the way that mindfulness is sometimes taught, especially in corporate settings. It's just taught as a technique for coping with stress, but not really changing anything else. So it just ends up reinforcing the status quo. And I also believe this is a trap that we can fall into individually. So regardless of what we've been taught, because it can be easier and more comfortable just to avoid the ethical and the relational aspects of the path and just focus solely on the meditation. But we can't actually separate our meditation practice from our ethics. And the Buddha was really clear in his teachings about the importance of ethics. And it includes particularly a commitment to non-harming. But he also taught that we're not separate from each other, we're interconnected, we're interdependent, and we all share the wish to be happy. So today's talk is about ethics, and it's also about how we can find meaning by getting over ourselves, by looking outwards a bit more. And of course the inner work is really important, but today I want to talk about the outer work. I want to talk about how we embody, how we practice in the wider world. Now, as we get older, some of us start to look for meaning in our lives. We start to ask questions about what really matters. And as humans, we don't always focus our energy and attention on what matters. We don't always think about meaning. And sometimes we're just too busy chasing what feels pleasant to us, trying to avoid what we don't like. And maybe I'm a slow learner, but I think I'm getting there. I think I'm starting to see that meaning doesn't come from just being comfortable or avoiding discomfort. It certainly doesn't come from acquisition. I don't feel like I need more stuff. It doesn't come from being preoccupied with our special uniqueness either. We don't have to leave some special legacy that's going to guarantee people are going to remember us after we're gone. And as I grow older, I'm more inclined to see all of those things just as expressions of the ego. To quote the book of Ecclesiastes, all is vanity. It's all meaningless. There's an awful lot of us in the world, and the whole world doesn't revolve around me or you. So that leaves the question, well, where do we find meaning? And despite their many differences, all the major world religions have one thing in common, and that is the idea that we can find meaning in service to other people. And there's pointers in every major religion, and there's common themes, really about looking beyond your own gratification, surrendering yourself to something bigger than you. And they all have something to say about selflessness, about compassion, about concern for others. So in Christianity, it's central. The teachings of Jesus emphasize love and charity and prioritizing the needs of others, treating other people as you would like to be treated. And in Islam, you're encouraged to show consideration for others. You're taught to help those in need through acts of charitable giving. Same with Hinduism. It highlights the consequences of your actions. And service to others is seen as a means to spiritual growth, to liberation. In Judaism, it calls for healing the world through acts of kindness and justice and charity. And it goes on. Sikhs are encouraged to work for the welfare of all and not just for their personal gratification. I just think it's really interesting how it keeps coming up in these different traditions. And certainly in Buddhism, we're taught to practice compassion towards all sentient beings. And the teachings really emphasize the importance of kindness and generosity and truthfulness. So the existence of all these teachings doesn't guarantee that people are going to act on them, but it does show a common thread. It shows the importance of looking beyond our own gratification, really considering the welfare of others, and this idea of service, of helping people, of surrendering our own selfish desires to the needs of the collective. Because, of course, we're social beings. We can't help the fact that we depend on each other. And all these teachings remind us of that. They strengthen this sense of interconnectedness. And modern science has something to say about this as well, actually. There's a lot of evidence from psychology that selflessness and generosity are actually very good for us. Individuals who engage in generous and altruistic behaviours tend to report much higher levels of happiness and improved life satisfaction, improved subjective well-being, and it reduces stress. It actually improves our mental health. And it gives us resilience. It actually gives us more resilience in the face of adversity when we help other people. So there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt from the point of view of science, that looking outwards is good for us. So this is very much a live issue for me, and I very much don't hold myself up as an example of someone who's getting it right. But it's a subject I'm certainly trying to engage with, and I'm trying to investigate it. And it isn't completely straightforward. There really is a need for balance, there's a need for discernment. And I do find it difficult to think of treating every sentient being with equal compassion and concern, especially when there's people close to you who depend on you. I remember really enjoying Olivia Manning's Fortunes of War novels, and there's a character in them called Guy Pringle, and he's absolutely maddening because he's generous and he's charismatic and he's got time for everyone he meets, and he does all these wonderful things. He raises everybody's morale, but he completely neglects his wife, Harriet. He completely neglects his life partner, and he puts her needs on a lower level than those of complete strangers. And I think there's something about that we need to bear in mind. And I certainly think Buddhist teachings don't ask you to be like that. Certainly not if you're a lay person as opposed to a monastic. As a lay person, as a householder, you've got a responsibility to your family. So at the time of the Buddha, there was a group of renunciants, women and men who had left their lives behind, and they were followers of the Buddha who decided to give everything up and seek awakening. But there was also householders, there was also people like us, and there was great respect for the householders in the community. People who continued to live with their families and their partners, working and saving and maintaining their assets wisely. So there was never a suggestion that everyone should renounce everything. And personally, I'm not ready to renounce everything. I think part of my sense of meaning comes from my place in the lives of my family and friends. And whatever we have to offer the wider world doesn't have to be completely at the expense of the people close to us or the people who rely on us. If we're going to find meaning in our lives through service to others, I actually think we can do this on many, many levels. We can do it within our closest networks. We can do it within our neighbourhoods and our communities. Maybe sometimes we can do it on a larger scale. So I'm not suggesting we can save the world. I don't think many of us have the means to make a huge difference in the world, to solve any of the big challenges on our own. But maybe we can start by asking what it is that we have to offer. Or we can even go back a bit further and look inside ourselves at the root causes of the challenges in the world. So if you agree that our collective problems are rooted in greed and hatred and confusion, this is somewhere we can start. We can actually recognize these things in ourselves, and then we can live or try and live in a way that counteracts these tendencies. Maybe try and support other people to do the same. And we can be an example to other people. So maybe we have a contribution to make towards bringing about societal change. Maybe we can engage in political or campaigning activities. Or maybe we can support other people to do that. But we also have to consider what's here at home. We have to consider the state of our hearts and minds. So if you look at for example, the communist revolutions of the 20th century, the idea was very noble. The idea was to replace the greed and the unfairness of capitalism with a system that was fair. They wanted to set up a system that promoted everyone's well-being and allowed everybody to flourish. But part of the problem was the leaders, people like Mao and Stalin, didn't address their own fear. They didn't address their own contempt, their paranoia, their aggression. If we neglect the state of our hearts and minds, whatever we do for the world is tainted. So to me, I think it's very important that we get the basics right. And if we can be happy and stable ourselves, that's also a gift to the world. It's a gift to the collective. If we can remain steady, if we can remain loving, in a world that's quite frightening and unstable. If we could take care of the state of the heart and mind and acknowledge our biases and our previous mistakes and really try and promote unity rather than dividing people, it's also a gift to the collective. I think we shouldn't underestimate that. And with that foundation, we can then start to engage with the bigger things, the bigger challenges, maybe with a bit more creativity. Thich Nhat Hanh came up with the 14 precepts of engaged Buddhism. And if you're interested in guidelines about how to live ethically, they're really worth looking up. And he wrote about things like doing your best to avoid causing harm to yourself, to others, to the environment. He talked about working for the welfare and liberation of others, especially those that are marginalized or oppressed. About recognizing your interconnectedness with society and the environment, about taking responsibility for the impact of your actions, and about practicing simplicity and living sustainably. And I think all of these things feel very doable. But I think first we have to get over ourselves. We have to overcome what we often feel, which is a sense of paralysis. Because it's okay to pick your battles. You can't do everything. There's a line from the band 10 years after they sang, "I'd love to change the world, but I don't know what to do, so I'll leave it up to you." And I think that speaks to the way that we get stuck. I often hear people talk about feeling a bit ashamed that they're not doing more. And we can feel shame about what we consume or about our environmental impact. But the problem with shame is it tends to stop the conversation. It's very much focused on a sense of self, a faulty sense of self maybe. And it paralyzes us. And maybe what we need is a willingness to reflect and change and grow, but without any identification with a particular sense of self-worth or lack of self-worth. Maybe sometimes we just need to get on and do it. So we're not meditating so that we can rise above everything that's wrong in the world. Sometimes we really have to engage with the world. Sometimes we have to do something, like maybe speaking out against what's wrong, what's unjust. But I think it's about doing this from a place of complete openness and compassion, rather than a place of hostility. And this is really the challenge of our lives, not to shrink and contract away from what's happening in the world. When the anger arises, when the sense of separation arises, not to deny it or suppress it, but at the same time, if we feel moved to do something, not to act from that anger, not to act from that hatred, to really be able to examine that and think about why we're doing what we're doing. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And I thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed this or got something from it, please do leave a review. It does help. And I'll hopefully see you next time.